There's Matt.
Hello. This is a cool background.
Yeah. We're all in the same office.
At the same desk.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion. Thank you all for joining. I am Candace Smith. I'm the events marketing manager with Bar Advisory. I'm going to make sure that that's not a question. Okay. All right. So we're thrilled today to be joined by thought leaders in the cybersecurity space, as well as a prominent organization in mental health. As we near the end of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we felt it important to have a conversation that dispels the notion that risk management and compliance are just a necessary evil. And instead, how can we shift the narrative to a security-focused culture? With a wealth of knowledge on risk management and compliance, our panelists will provide some insight for us today on topics related to governance and shared responsibility, as well as risk and the culture mindset. Plus, we'll take a walk along modern health's security journey. So I'll have the panelists introduce themselves in just a moment to get things started, but first, a few housekeeping items. So first of all, we will address any questions during an audience Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please remain on mute during the webinar and you can submit your questions through the chat and we will address those at the end. Also, a recording of the webinar will be provided after the event via email, along with a feedback survey, as we'd love to hear any of your thoughts regarding your experience with us today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our panelists for some introductions and we will get started with Brad Thies from Bar Advisory.
Awesome. Thanks, Candace. And it's a pleasure to be on this call with all this amazing talent and panelists and looking forward to the discussion. So I'm president and founder of Bar Advisory. And our purpose really is building a world of trust. And we do that through cybersecurity resilience and a couple of different components. We are those root canal folks that give the audits, but we like to partner with clients and work with them through more of a consultative lens and making sure that we are building trust and not just the gotcha auditors. So a lot of the work that we do is focused on cloud service providers, innovative tech, from startup to enterprise. And as that cloud is really being adopted more on the enterprise level, the more we continue to work with larger clients. So pleasure to be here and thank you for having me.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to kick it next to Matt with Vanta.
Hi, my name is Matt Spitz. I lead our technical teams at Vanta. And what is Vanta but an automated security and compliance solution to help companies streamline their security and compliance processes. We have a couple customers with us today and we partner closely with another on this call. I'm really glad to join y'all. And I think essentially there's an immediate need for a lot of these companies in terms of getting themselves compliant and doing the necessary diligence and work up front to do that. But what Vanta really offers is a long-term suite of tools that grow with a company and their security journey to kind of help them rely on automation rather than on humans and process to manage their security posture.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. Andre, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Lumos?
Yes, hello everyone. I am Andre, co-founder and CEO of Lumos. Lumos is an identity governance and privilege access management tool. So basically there are two problems, right? People use more and more SaaS, it's a problem. And then once people get access to SaaS, they never lose it. And that's both a security problem, right? Where, people have AWS privileged accounts and don't need it, but also a compliance problem. We all know how nasty user access reviews are, and it takes a lot of time. So Lumos makes it simple for you to automate self-service access requests, just-in-time access, which means I need access to this resource just for 7 days, and user attestation, so user access reviews. I'm very excited. I worked in the government before this and saw this in Germany at first hand, and I'm excited to kind of talk about risk management today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andre. And finally, Michael from Modern Health. Michael?
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Hensley. I'm head of cybersecurity at Modern Health. I also get the pleasure or the pain, depending on how you look at it, of being our HIPAA security officer. And if you guys have not heard of Modern Health, we provide a robust suite of mental health care offerings for employers to provide for their employees. So it's really great to see kind of technology meet healthcare, because as you guys probably know, healthcare in the US and sometimes like worldwide in terms of mental health care is broken. And so we're here to try to fix that. So I'm excited to join these panelists and kind of discuss our journey and discuss how we've used some of these tools to help accomplish our compliance needs.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all for taking the time today to have this conversation with us. Well, let's go ahead and get started. All right. So our first question is, risk management takes many disciplines. Technology can play a small but crucial role. How do you think about audits, automation, and readiness in terms of managing risk? Andre, I'm going to kick this one to you first.
Yes. So here's something interesting. Everyone here in the room. The world changed, especially with COVID. The new game is that we're using, hundreds of apps and thousands of permissions in those apps. And before, security and even compliance had maybe like 30, 40 apps to manage. But now it's like 200, 300 with, like as said, thousands of permissions. So how can security, oversee, or compliance oversee all of that? That's impossible. So people always say security is everyone's responsibility, right? But this is like a very vague answer, in my opinion. The question is like how to create accountability and incentives. That's what the thing is. It's kind of gameplay. How to create incentives to delegate, certain security roles out. And I think it's all about kind of putting the right infrastructure in place that makes sure that every employee in the company acts in a secure way. Right? It's like kind of similar to like you are the builder of a street, right? And you need to put traffic lights on so that people behave. But people are still driving. They're the drivers, not security, right? And how can security set the rules but let employees play the game based on those rules? So that's kind of the narrative I want to tell. And I want to just give a concrete example because I'm most proficient in access management. That's what I'm thinking about a lot. And before, people did a lot of role-based birthright access management. So a security analyst asked every director what employees need which access, and then they create roles, and those employees get those roles assigned when they join or when they move from one role to another. The problem about that is we have more apps and more permissions. So security is responsible and accountable for everything in here. And it's impossible to maintain all those roles on a continuous basis. So an example, Segments and a security team did an analysis, and they did this role-based birthright access thing where security owned everything. And 60% of every AWS admin user in their instance didn't use the access actually. And so how to change the game? That's kind of a question. And at least in access management, again, to give the example, is how to kind of give people limited birthright access, which means an engineer can just like read permissions into production systems. And if they need write permissions, security makes it simple for end users to request that privileged resource, right? So going back to the initial question, security is everyone's responsibility. That's kind of risk management is everyone's responsibility. At least for access management, in that example, it's about enabling employees to request secure access and administrators to approve that access instead of predefining every single scenario, because that puts all the onus on security instead of creating an infrastructure for other people to build off of.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I hear, Andre, what you're saying is, we have people, we have process, and we have technology. And I'm a huge believer that people are driving things forward, but we're always constantly short of people, and we're always constantly expecting our people to do too much. And then on the technology side, technology changes every year, it changes every quarter even. And you just mentioned the explosion of SaaS applications. So what's going to marry those things together is process. And it's the process that really is going to be the stability that continues to push your organization forward. And especially when you think of people and how well we are at rationalizing away risk, how often something does not hit the mark and somebody just explains it away, it's not that big of a deal. And so I love how you're talking about a way to improve the process to, whether it's just in time, what do you call it? Just in time access, zero trust, rollback. There's those nouns are always going to change and how things are being done. It's the verbs that matter, and knowing how to get on the same page with the language and how you speak to that through process. And a lot of times what we do through audits is let's identify the assets that you do have out there in devices, networks, applications, data, users, and let's look at the risk profile across those different domains and buckets, because that's the baseline. No matter what changes, you got to identify where your applications, where your assets sit within those domains, and then know where your shortcomings are. And an example of that would be every compliance framework has mentioned something about penetration or vulnerability assessment. Well, that means a lot of different things to many different organizations based on the risk. Some might look at a pen test and say, well, we did a pen test, but all it really covers is maybe the application, it misses the network, or it misses the people component. And so how do you make sure you're speaking the same language when you say pen test? Did you do a vulnerability assessment to first identify where your issues are before you go out and do the penetration test? So all this is to say is that from an audit perspective, I love how you mentioned the explosion of things. How can you take that process and start to identify the tools to put that in place versus the other way around? And we want to make sure we're always taking that very non-gotcha or checkbox approach with risk assessment, so that we're right sizing the right audit approach, and we're not trying to audit you for things that it's not relevant.
Brad, I really like what you said there about just kind of like, it seems like the theme is like understanding the business. Like I found that that's been probably the most helpful thing for us in terms of like having great compliance. And like when we're thinking about like audits, or we're thinking about risk assessments, or anything having to do with like checking the security maturity, like I see part of my job is to like constantly understand, hey, what business decisions are we making? Like where are our critical assets? And so it's really difficult to have like kind of like a first class compliance program if like you don't understand that, and you don't kind of like expend the time and lean on your people to understand like, what's really driving like business processes, what kind of technology are you using, like where is your critical data? And so for us at Modern Health, like I lean a lot on our great folks to kind of explain to me and to let me know like, hey, we're using these processes right here, like we're using these tools for this kind of stuff. And that helps our security team kind of build out that risk profile. And then when it comes to audit time, it's not like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be a wild ride into the dark. It's like, okay, we understand like, here's where our critical assets are. And so like when we are, assessing risk, or we're doing things like access audits, we know like, hey, the criticality of findings, we can kind of benchmark against that because, there's like an understanding of the business.
Yeah, I like the framing too of, I think when we say process, there's absolutely process at the top of the funnel in terms of figuring out at the top of the process to figure out what should we pay attention to and why. Like, where is critical data? What are the systems we need to secure? Like where is the greatest risk in our organization and where does it live? I think where a lot of companies get tripped up, and especially smaller companies when they have 50,000 other things to worry about, is actually implementing the controls that you choose based on the risk that you select. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where technology like plays a, I think Candace, you framed it as a small but crucial role. I would argue that role increases over time, in part due to the proliferation of tooling, right? Like, so on one hand, having 200 SaaS tools at your company rather than 50 means that there's 200 more things to monitor. Mm-hmm. But because they're SaaS tools and you're not storing your data in a closet, you're storing it in a cloud service, or because you're managing identity, not through like, we're managing your email in a cloud service, like not in a box in the closet. Like the surface area of the tools that a company uses is that much more exposed to technology solutions to manage the controls for them. And I think especially for a smaller company, a big part of the challenge in managing their security posture is actually implementing those controls that they decide as part of the risk assessment. And if you rely on process to go look at all the AWS accounts to make sure that all the people have the right access to them, that's a lot of work. And then it's typically done by people who have other jobs and other jobs that are more urgent. If not more, like in some cases more important, but almost always more urgent. Then it just doesn't happen, or doesn't happen to the degree that it should. And so by leveraging technology, like, I can talk more about what Vanta does, but Andre's example previously of managing AWS access, like the tool lowers the barrier to entry to actually practice the security in doing it. And so, talking about vulnerability management and automatically detecting, tracking vulnerabilities to remediation, managing vendor risk via automation, et cetera, these are tools these are sort of the things that Vanta can provide. And just because of the visibility that the tool has, because a company's security surface area is now online in a way that can be queried by APIs.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt, and I think something that I mean, analogy that I heard, I'm not going to take credit for it. I think it's a great analogy with this, is that what you just mentioned really is about how to organize cybersecurity, how to organize it in a way that it makes sense to humans. When there's so much volume of activity, how are you able to see where things are at and where to conceptualize and actually put things in place? And to Andre's point about security is everybody's responsibility, it is vague. How can you organize that then even further to then delegate accountability? The analogy is like if you walk into a grocery store and imagine, instead of nice little aisles everywhere to go find your milk or cheese or whatever, it's you just throw everything in the middle, all the food in the middle of the grocery store, and say, good luck. We know what we want to find, but it's really hard to find that if it's not organized in a way that really makes sense to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. This is actually amazing. I'm actually excited to kind of talk more about that point. I know there's like a next question, but around how to make security scalable. Like the interesting thing about, departments like security is like, we need to do more with less, microeconomic, things are kind of vague, but then, leadership comes and says like, okay, we need to be FedRAMP, compliant, or like, or SOX compliant, but, same resources. And so how is that possible? It's just like, you need to change process, and you need to change how you interact with certain, with the whole organization, how to enable every department to be secure. And I'm actually excited to talk more about that.
Yeah. I bet Michael has some stories with all the regulations that come down to his company.
Oh yeah, I know I used this joke before to the panelists, but like every acronym that you can think of in terms of compliance seems to apply to our company. So it's new for you folks watching the webinar, but yeah, I mean, for us, it's really been, we have this saying at Modern Health, like one of our company values is embrace the journey, and I think that goes super well with compliance, where we start out, whether it's risk assessment, whether it's access audits, or figuring out like who should have access to what, or what kind of security controls we want to put on each system. Like as we're working on stuff, we try to also like take a step back and say, like, what are the pain points here? Like, are there ways that we can invest in technology? Are there ways that we can invest in subject matter experts? And since I've been here for 1.5 years, like we've definitely transformed like our compliance landscape. We've used Vanta, I think at least for a couple of years now, and really trying to kind of get that organization going and kind of lower that barrier to entry. Like compliance and audits don't have to be scary, but Brad, like you said, if you're throwing all the food in the middle of the grocery store, that's when it gets really scary. When you've got a bunch of stuff that you have to pick through, you're like, oh my gosh, like none of this is organized. Like there's no way that we're going to comply with these regulations, or there's no way we're going to effectively do risk management or risk assessments. But when you start to kind of think, all right, well, what are our pain points? Hey, this process takes a long time, or this process, like there's some there's some cloudiness here. Let's dig into that, and like let's invest the time. So we try to make compliance like a first-class product inside of our organization, and that definitely helps to have that to kind of get everything organized.
I love that mindset, by the way. Compliance, a first-class product. I'm actually curious, for everyone who's in there, Matt, this is like quite I'm actually excited to hear from you. Is you know, it's very daunting, like being like very secure, very, you know, managing risk in a very good way. There's like they're maturity curves. And when you get started, or when you're in a certain maturity curve, you feel like, oh man, I need to be there. And you were at Dropbox before as engineering leader. And you've seen this yourself, right? How to mature an organization out, you know, throughout IPO as well. And now you're at Vanta. I'm actually curious how you would how you think about, you know, the journey that, you know, Michael said of like, you know, compliance and risk management is a journey. How did you see that, you know, being an engineering leader and now building for compliance and security leaders?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I can speak to it just in my time at Vanta. Like I joined Vanta at about 20 people, and we've obviously grown, and our risk profile has changed significantly since then. And I think the way that we think about it internally and at Vanta in terms of how we build our product, there is this like security maturity. I don't know if I'm going right to left or left to right, but there's this like security maturity journey. And I think on the extreme ends of the spectrum, you have like theoretically security is based on mitigating risk. Like that's the whole point of it, right? And if you're a big company, like call it Google, you've got a lot of money in the bank, you have interesting information, you have a huge reputational loss, et cetera, and a lot of people who are interested in taking down your company in very varying ways. And so the strategy that you use to identify and mitigate that risk is incredibly sophisticated. I can only imagine. On the complete other end of the spectrum, you have a company that just started yesterday has nothing to lose. There's no technology, there's no data, there's no money, there's nothing. And there's no risk because there's nothing to lose. And so what's interesting is like those different steps along that journey in terms of how companies invest in security and when they care. And I think what's really interesting is I think in the last 5-6 years, with the general like trend toward a greater scrutiny on vendor security, and specifically making sure that not, you know, if I use Lumos and Lumos gets breached, my customers don't care how I lost their data. Like it's my fault. It's my fault for not being a good vendor. Not that Lumos would ever get breached. But you know what I mean? Like, and so what that means is that like there's an increased scrutiny on the vendors, and with the proliferation of SaaS tools, there's so many more of them out there that there are more and more companies, these vendors that need to care about their company's security in order to demonstrate it. And so previously, I think what you would have seen is that like a company has nothing to lose, and then all of a sudden they do have something to lose, and often they realize it because they get breached, and then they need to start investing in risk, and compliance is sort of associated with that, and compliance was just for larger companies previously. But especially in recently, with more and more tools out there and an increased scrutiny on vendor security, companies are needing to care about security in service of compliance first before they maybe would have thought about it from a risk perspective. And so compliance for a lot of companies ends up being the entry point for, okay, now I need to start thinking about security, you know, whether I'm doing that as part of a specific compliance framework or more generally. That ends up being very interesting. And I think that, speaking personally, it's been interesting to see Vanta go from much lower risk profile and much lower, smaller customer base, less money in the bank, et cetera, to a much higher profile company with that many more, with a much broader risk surface area and much more to lose, and sort of how we've made that journey along the way too.
I like, and Brad, I'm curious also to get your feedback there, but what I like here is maybe for everyone to take away is the different maturity curves. And what I loved about, you know, vendor security is kind of a good example. You know, when a breach happens or when you fail an audit, you know, no one cares about who's responsible for it. You know, it's an impact on you. The thing that I think about is there's like kind of something called, so I used to kind of study philosophy, and there's something called the privacy paradox. Privacy paradox is like people want to be privacy focused, or like employees are good people, right? They're not like kind of trying to cause harm. They want to kind of be secure, but only if it doesn't slow them down, right? If there are two similar processes, they will always take the more secure path, right? But if one is less, you know, if one has more friction, let's say during code reviews or during deploy or during bringing vendors on board, people will usually take the less, the path of less friction. You know, we live in a world of instant gratification right now, and 1,000 emails and 1,000 Slack messages. So that's how we go. So the question is, in that world where people are good corporate citizens, but only if the compliant and secure path is the easy path, how can I, as a security leader, not just think about policies, but also as how to kind of bring those policies into the company, right? How can those policies be executed in a frictionless way because people will then follow them and actually appreciate it? They enable, like, the team enables me to be secure and doesn't kind of slow me down drastically. And people can think about this, and Brad, I'm curious how you think about this from a vendor onboarding perspective. We think a lot about this from a access request perspective, right? Instead of you needing to do access reviews every quarter, and the manager needs to we support that, right? You need to do an access reviews every quarter. People don't do that, by the way. You have an access review, people just screen over it and just click on accept to everything, even though they shouldn't. By the way, not everyone does it, but in general, there's click fatigue. Why? Security process, it slows me down. I don't see the benefit for myself. I'm not going to do it. So now, how to change the paradigm? The paradigm is hey, you have less access by default. You actually don't need it. But if you need it, self-service, just go into Slack. So that's what we're trying to build with Lumos. Go into Slack, say I need privileged access into AWS. Great, approvals are given. You're on call, good to go. And they're oh. And then after 7 days, I remove the access and no access review necessary. So that's kind of one example how to operationalize security and make it frictionless.
Yeah, I love that. That takes the bureaucracy out of I'm doing an access review once a quarter. Why am I doing this really? But if you have a just-in-time access, it really removes that need, and it creates that frictionless. And how we look at that from a compliance perspective. Compliance usually is the baseline, but you first got to look at what's the culture of your company. What's your identity first? Because there's typically, and if you're familiar with there's that's called the CSCF quadrants of security cultures. There's the tight control, which is more process. There's the compliance culture, which is more like your banking regulators. That's the JP Morgan Chase sending you the 1,000 question security questionnaire to the 20-person startup. And then there's more of some of the startup type modes of the trust culture. And then there's the autonomy culture. And so you first have to identify who are you as a company, because you can't expect to take these compliance frameworks and adopt it against the grain of what your culture is. That's just never going to work. It might help you pass an audit, but then once you get through the audit, you'll go back to your own ways of doing things. It's really important as a CISO, especially, to identify who are you as a culture, so that you can translate these different compliance requirements and regulations and security questionnaires into your own language inside the company, but then leverage these standards so that you can talk about it externally as well. Often what we'd work with our clients on is be transparent. If you don't do something within a questionnaire that you might get from a third party, and I'll pick on JP Morgan Chase because they have the most extensive questionnaires out there, is that just be transparent about it so that you can get on the same page and realize we're all working on this together. It's not my company versus your company. We're trying to solve the same problem of cybersecurity resiliency. And that's the supply chain aspect of it. We're all trying to solve the same problem. We're all trying to get on the same page. These questionnaires and these compliance requirements really just start the conversation, and they should be looked at it that way and be transparent about it. I've never seen a client lose business because they maybe didn't hit the mark on this specific questionnaire. I know it's scary, but that's the beginning of a conversation so that you can get the control that they really want, right sizing the organization.
I think there's a connection here too around companies needing to start to think about security earlier because of the general focus on compliance in the world. I think that presents an opportunity both it forces the conversation of culture earlier than it would otherwise. I mean, when I was I've seen at larger companies, you get to 500-600 people, hundreds of engineers before you start thinking about SOC 2 compliance. And then you have to bolt on these practices that should have been ingrained in your culture much, much earlier around enforcing code reviews and making sure that the right people have access to the right things and data and all the different tooling and systems that you need for that. Going back to what you were saying, Andre, I think that I think that it doesn't have to be as much of a paradox. In many ways, like the right way to do things is also the more secure way to do things. And yes, it's true that like running a script on my laptop to push the entirety of code to production is possibly faster than pushing a button in a CI/CD pipeline. But pushing it in a CI/CD pipeline like enables better tracking and understand, like there's better controls on who can push that button. It's easier to understand like who has done that at what time. It's easier to understand like the security control of it. It's also easier to understand like that it's a more pristine environment than your laptop, that you can have deterministic like pushes and rollbacks. There's like a lot of efficiency. There's a lot of efficiency gains in a lot of the things one might do in service of security. And I think that the earlier companies start thinking about this, the earlier companies get pulled into like having to think about making secure systems that are in many ways more efficient. The gains are not just in security and the security culture, the gains also play forward in terms of developer productivity, efficiency, et cetera.
Curious, actually, it doesn't need to be that way. And I think that might be for everyone interesting to hear. Michael, I'm curious how you would answer to this. I want to, being a product manager previously myself, you could tell compliance with security is a product internally, which is awesome. I mean, it is, even like for Modern Health, you need to be compliant with, HIPAA and even HITRUST. And so it's kind of a product, right? So often security and compliance is the department of no, right? And instead of the department of no with a K at the beginning. And the interesting thing about security, it is an enabler, at least in Modern Health, you're enabling the whole team to, distribute the product to more companies. How do you manage the mindset around like, hey, I don't want to even like talk with security, because like they're going to tell me no. How did you successfully, maybe do you have one or two examples how you successfully build like a security first culture in your company?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you asked. I was kind of writing some notes down while you guys were talking. I see part of my role as like, I said first class product earlier. Like, I think I should be selling security internally to the business and kind of providing people with reasons why we are doing things and showing them that like, hey, if we have first class security here, this is actually going to unlock business value, or I hate to use the term business value. I know it's such an overused term, but or efficiency or other things like inside the organization. And when you frame it that way, we've really found that like people kind of very much embrace that. Like, so we were talking about access management. As we've kind of come through our access management journey, we've really tried to, the last couple of years, really embrace the use of, SSO for everything, put everything. We use Okta for our IDP. And, there's some pain moving people over, but then we're like, hey, you can have like a secure way to access all of your apps instead of having to remember 9 passwords and probably reusing the same password for every single thing. You log in here, boom, 1 click, you're good. There's some, efficiency gains there that's unlocked. You can even like extend that to like SOC 2. So we're SOC 2 compliant. We have been for a couple of years, and the origination of our SOC 2 compliance was like, hey, as we were starting to sell to more and more people, we're a technology company, but we're also a healthcare company. People were asking us more and more about our compliance. Hey, do you have a SOC 2 report? I think it was Matt that said earlier that like businesses are thinking more and more about supply chain security. So, there's more scrutiny on our security practices. And so, we've kind of we've started to build kind of a machine around, SOC 2 and HIPAA compliance in terms of like investing money and saying like, hey, if we really make this a first class product, like access audits are going to be easier, but ultimately it's going to decrease the sales cycle. And so, I was talking to some of our salespeople last month. We use a product called SafeBase, which like puts up like a security page, so people can go there and see like, hey, here's a summary of all our security controls. Here's all of our pre-filled questionnaires. Here's our SOC 2 report. Here's our pen test report. And so it's like really easy for people doing the due diligence for our potential customers or renewals to to get access to that data. But, you know, I was talking to them about like, hey, you know, would you guys be interested at all in integrating this into Salesforce? And it's like, oh yeah, like that would help us save these hours. So it was really easy for me then to go to finance and to our senior leadership and say like, hey, you know, if we invest more money in our security compliance posture that we're saying externally, this is actually going to allow us to like sell to more people, like less time for the salespeople, you know, our account managers can go out, drum up more business. And so I haven't really found a good example yet where like, if we unlock like a good security practice that I can't, you know, also sell it hand in hand with some other like kind of efficiency unlock for our organization, or that like, you know, there's going to be time and money saved. So it's always like framing it that way instead of being like, well, security says you have to do this, or this law says you have to do this, like framing it in a way where it's like, yeah, you're actually helping the business by like doing this practice. Like that's how I think that's one of the ways that we've kind of built up like that culture where people like really have embraced like being compliant with a lot of things.
Yeah, but that's awesome. And I know like one of our other kind of themes of this is that security mindset, and that mindset that you just mentioned, Michael, is awesome. When you said, hey, through our identity management solution, which identity is nuts today, it's like the SAP of our time. It's just an ongoing project that never ends. We're always got to work on identity management. But what you said is not only you're unlocking value for your product and unlock the business value, whether you like that word or not, to your customers, but you're unlocking the value to the users as well. And an example of that, which it's a subtle shift in mindset, but oftentimes in compliance or cybersecurity engineers, we measure the volume of tickets that we solve. Whereas maybe a different metric that you want to use in risk assessment is how happy were your users and how you went about to solve that ticket. And that's a mindset shift of, if you have more happy users, the likelihood that they're not going to bypass all those security controls that you put in place goes up significantly. And so I just want to commend you, Michael, on just that subtle mind shift change is what we need to really think about the human element behind all this.
Yeah, I think it starts with a good culture too. I think that like, you know, having security be a part of the company and contribute to just culture at large. Like I try, like, you know, we just had like a company offsite for the first time in a while because of COVID. Like, there were times where I'm like, man, it'd be really nice to just like, you know, go just spend some time by myself. And I'm like, hey, like part of my job is like, I want to shake a lot of hands, like to show that like there is a human element to security. And so like, I encourage my team, like, hey, let's be a part of the company, just like culture abroad. And like, that'll help when it comes time to either have hard conversations or ask people to do stuff. They're like, oh yeah, like I know this guy, like, and I know that he's like here to help with just kind of drive the company forward instead of like, oh my gosh, like security's coming and knocking on my door, like can't believe it, like this sucks. So like I do try to, you know, participate in just like company culture as a large, and like I think that helps really like shift the mindset for people. It's like, oh yeah, security's not so scary, compliance is not so scary.
I think the giving people a good experience when they work with the security team and sort of measuring it in the same way you'd measure a technical support team, that really resonates. I think there's another side of this too, which is how can you surface security concerns, right? Like Michael, if you're the only one who cares about security concerns in the whole organization, your function will be limited by the places that you can see and the time you have to look at everything that's out there. And I think that there's especially before you end up hiring for security expertise at a company, there's things you can do to create incentives for anyone to surface and celebrate surfacing security concerns. And I think one example of this is on our engineering team, we have a couple of, especially before we had a security lead, we had a monthly security discussion where anybody could bring up ideas around like how we might better centralize access to AWS, or, you know, this tool that has access to customer data, like maybe we should find ways to like have more granular access, provide more granular access, et cetera. And by creating this space for people to surface those concerns and then actioning them when they do, like actually going and funding those products, it encourages people to keep their eyes open for other things that might be security concerns. And it's not to say that everything is as of equal importance. Some things are, you know, mitigate less risk than others. But it starts with having ideas presented. There's another side of it too, which is like when there are actually security issues, creating a blameless culture where it's okay to surface them. And especially if I do something bad, knowing that I'm not gonna get blamed for it or fired for it if I surface a concerning, like, makes me more comfortable doing so. And so just the way in which a company acts with security, whether that's through handling like technical support type cases, whether it is surfacing and surfacing potential areas for the roadmap, or in terms of incident response when bad things go wrong, the way in which the posture that security has within the company has significant implications in terms of the visibility and effectiveness of that work.
I agree with this, especially going back to the thing that we talked about earlier, is, game has changed. We have more things in the cloud, more incidents, more apps, more permissions. Everything is more, and as we aligned on is, security cannot do everything. So how can we actually incentivize, as you said, other people to be actually evangelist of security? And here's what I mean. The first step is actually you need to kind of create good relationships. So as a security and a compliance or risk management leader, ask yourself, who's actually your friend from other departments in the company, right? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it engineering? Is it DevOps? Like, do you really have people, if you really kind of reflect this weekend, do you have people that will hold you back, right? So the first step is actually building those relationships. And you can do this in many ways. Sales needs kind of a security thing built, you do it for them, right? Or engineering, had an incident about something, you help them out with this more. Like, they're kind of different ways how you can help people and create rapport with them, right? So once you did that, right? Once you did that, people just like feel like, when they talk in their boardroom about, different priorities, they just like have a good relationship to you and see you in a very good light, right? And then you can then slowly inject the culture of being a security first mindset, right? You saw firsthand how I helped you, right? It was good to be security focused. You had problems and we resolved them, and we can actually proactively resolve them in the future if we do XYZ changes. And that's how you can create good corporate citizens, because in a similar way as in government, right? If the government gives you stipends, right? You feel excited, right? When the check comes in. And as we said, security needs to be more of an infrastructure and compliance and infrastructure in a company instead of like a department that, just like tries to resolve alerts and requests. So that's kind of one thing I think when it comes to mindset, how to build relationships, to then incentivize and have rapport with people to be security first. Like, hey, you're not going to get access to the admin access. Not every engineer will have admin access to AWS now. It's going to be just view access, and you'll get access to it, just in time for a particular time. Instead of saying like, oh, is this going to slow us down? Saying like, oh yeah, I can see why, we had those problems with customers. Or we had those incidents that happened because some, engineer just like deployed code on production where they shouldn't have, and that can then create change. Sorry, that was kind of a rant about how to create a security first culture or compliance first culture.
It actually, Andre, it played great into a Q&A question that we had gotten in, asking, how do you get departments that aren't usually thinking about security and risk to pay attention and prioritize security and risk? So if anyone else would like to chime in.
Put it on their job description. There's got to be accountability. And so we've had some success with our clients to, and I mean, kind of in addition to the developing the relationship, is then you have a role for your day-to-day job. What specific role do you play in security, and define that? So, maybe your role is just to watch out for suspicious links. maybe for other departments, working in collaboration with the CISO, you actually have a measure around that. So maybe if you're in the legal department, what percentage of your contracts have gone through security review, as an example? So to put that on start with the accountability and put that role on the accountability chart.
Curious how Michael would respond to that. I actually agree with his accountability. One thing is like accountability is always like kind of a tops down thing. I'm pushing back here a little bit, saying like, okay, that's your job, now do it. Usually that's what intrinsic motivation, where you say like, okay, I want to do it because it's going to help the company. And one thing is kind of collaboration. We saw that productivity was increased in our company, but just like pushing two people together from different departments. Let's say marketing actually work with engineering. It's nothing to do with security, but to write a blog. Like, oh, security engineering suddenly had better relationship with marketing and marketing with, engineering. So I'm curious, Michael, how did you see, creating those cross collaboration, to create report or like make, maybe projects or initiatives, or like, how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I do is just, I try to be visible, especially with kind of senior leaders from other departments. I think both like a top down and a bottom up approach can help with security, because what I found is like a lot of engineers and other folks like on the ground, like in our tech organization, they're super excited about finding out more about security, but carving out space where people understand that it's part of their job. Like I really try to work hard to, the senior leaders at our company make it super easy too. I really try to work hard to develop relationships, meet with people on a regular basis, and, check in with them about like, hey, what are these initiatives that are coming up? Is there anything that like security needs to involve with early, or, whenever we're doing planning, like trying to ensure that we're talking about security in the same way that we talk about like other products or other business initiatives. Like, hey, we need to invest in this part, like the engineering side. And so like we just got done with like a major planning cycle for next year, and part of that was kind of putting on my sales hat and saying, hey, these are really important. This is going to like help us get more customers. This is going to help ensure like security in this area, because this could be like a vulnerable spot for us if we ignore this for much longer. And I think the other thing too is like, I know people have mentioned, just kind of making security fun, or making security like very approachable. I always try to add the human element to conversations I have with people as well. Like I don't always just make it about security. Like I want to get to know the people that I'm working with. And so when it comes time to like have those conversations and say like, hey, we're lacking in this area. Like I not only have like the business justification to where like, hey, let's all get on board, let's invest in this. But like people know me as well. And like, they're like, oh yeah, like Mike's not just coming to me when he needs help with something or he needs like engineering time, but like he really cares about me as a person. And like, that's, part of what I love about working at Modern Health is that we, want to invest in like people, is that's the thing that we are trying to invest in. And so we try really hard to like invest in the people like inside of our organization.
Awesome. Well, I have one more question that I want to get to you guys, and that's, what's a practical piece of advice that these attendees can take away from this webinar and implement about, eliminating the necessary evil mindset and getting more into a security culture mindset? So just like one piece of practical advice. I think, Matt, let's start with you.
Sure. I think that it is just start early with all this stuff. Like, I think that there's a perception that either you're practicing security or you are in what we're left not practicing security, or you're practicing security, and it's binary. And either you're totally insecure, you're not doing anything at all, or you're perfectly secure and everything is buttoned up and you'll never have to worry about anything. And by framing it as this binary thing, it's a lot. It seems like a lot of work. It seems like a lot of attention. It doesn't feel like it's as important as all the other important stuff you have to do just because it's not urgent. And I think that starting with all this stuff, right, with managing your vendors, with starting to manage vulnerabilities, with starting to manage access, starting to manage like employee onboarding and offboarding and all these different things that a company has to do to maintain its security, start simple. Start with a spreadsheet. Doesn't have to be super robust, doesn't have to be great, but it's something. And you can always iterate and make it better over time. But the challenge is when the amount that you should be caring about security surpasses the amount that you actually do care about security. And that's what puts you at great risk. And so by starting with something simple, when your risk is simple, you can iterate and improve it as your risk surface area grows. And it's less daunting to do that versus like framing it as a binary thing.
Awesome. Brad, do you want to chime in?
I agree with that 100%. Start with a spreadsheet, and maybe the first thing that goes on that spreadsheet is, what do you have out there? What are your assets? If you don't know what you have, what's your threat surface area, it's hard to put a cybersecurity program around it. And going back to the grocery store analogy, if you want to just use these aisles as an example, you want to make sure you know where your devices are. You want to make sure you know what your network is, if you own a network, or if it's maybe sourced to a cloud provider. You want to know what your applications are. You definitely not want to know your data that you consume and process and where that's located. And you want to know your users. I mean, those are the different buckets that we usually think about when it comes to getting a good inventory. Put it in a spreadsheet if you don't have a tool yet.
I think for the people that are later in the journey, right? It's then the question is like, okay, but how do I, drive change management? I already have those vendor sheets and all that kind of stuff, and it's not good. How I would think about this is like, just like going back, we're just like wrapping up, I would say, but it goes back into, okay, what change do you want to drive? Let's say I'm taking always the examples that I know because I cannot speak about other things, but I want to have people should have less production access into AWS, let's say, or they should have less admin access. Okay, people won't like that because right now they can do a lot of things. Okay, then first let me create rapport with people. Let me create friends in engineering. Engineering will probably not like this the most, but let me actually help them out with incidents or with like certain things, with certain initiatives. Let's co-fund certain initiatives that are important for the company. That's step number one, create rapport, right? And then step two is you will just like love your job in a better way. Security and risk is like kind of a tough job, where again, you need to often say no, but how can you make this a job that you like? It's like, just like I have a lot of friends in the company that kind of support you. So then, all right, now I have rapport with the main department where I want to drive change. I want to have less permissions. All right, then let me create a process. Going back to people, process, technology. Let me create a process, that will make it actually easier for them to do certain things. There's actually a benefit. There's always a trade-off, but there's actually a benefit for them to go my way. In the case of access management, again, what we always say is, hey, of course, people have less access, but they will be able to request access in a faster way. They can just go into Slack. They say, I want to have this access, done deal. And they say, like, yeah, okay, probably won't have admin access, but it makes sense. We want to support big customers. But it's so simple for me to get what I need. So those are, I think, the 3 steps. You want to do change management. Step 1, create report. Step 2, make it frictionless for them.
Wonderful. Michael, do you have anything to add as, one key takeaway?
Yeah, I'll just say that, if you understand like how your business operates, like how people receive communications or like how people work, like try to work inside that framework and then, kind of embrace the journey. I know I've said that before, but, like other people have said, maybe start with a spreadsheet, or if you're using something like Jira, like we try to work within like people's normal work streams. So it makes it really easy to kind of like sneak security in there. Because a lot of organizations, especially if you have like a product group or you're building product, there's a lot of tools that are already out there that can help you like on your compliance journey. So like, well, that's like a Jira board or, something else that your company can do. And then I'll also, I know you asked for one, but I'll sneak in another one here. It's that, always be willing to try to be creative with solutioning and thinking about like, hey, what are your big pain points? Like, if you notice that like a part of your compliance process, like one of the reasons that Andre and I have been, that we got connected is it's like, hey, like access management, like a little bit of an arduous task. Like, I wonder if there's a vendor out there that can solve this, or I wonder if we can bring in somebody who can like unlock efficiency. So like try to be creative and don't think that like compliance or risk management has to just be like, got to do it in a spreadsheet because like this is the way that it's done. Like try to be kind of creative with it and find like a solution that kind of fits your business.
Wonderful. Partnerships are immensely important. So we have already answered a couple of questions in Q&A, and we've got a couple minutes left on the webinar. I'm going to encourage anyone out there to submit your questions. We'll try to get them answered. If not, we will answer them offline separately. But we do have one. What are your thoughts on starting early with compliance as code and introducing/enhancing risk by introducing and reducing the workload with risk management as code by defining criticality? And then while having that spreadsheet whiteboard hacking, early automation adoption generally costs less? Question.
Yes, totally agree. I mean, I think that like starting early is better than not starting early. Starting early with automation is even better. And there's a lot of, in the same way that like, instead of pushing code from your laptop, pushing via CI/CD, similarly, instead of pushing buttons in the AWS console, leveraging something like Terraform, which you can use to tag assets in terms of what sort of data that they're holding and whether they're production or the risk or things like that. Like the more you can see it in one place and the more you automate, the better. And so the answer is yes. Please, early is better than not at all, and early plus automation. And the earlier you do automation pays those dividends down the road.
Yeah,
I'll
completely.
leverage Michael's term sneak. If you're doing compliance as code, you're really sneaking security elements into the whole entire process, because they can go through easier checkpoints and gates, and that using that frictionless piece so that you don't have those bottlenecks throughout the processes. It's awesome.
You also get this added benefit too. If you, the one way that you can sell this is like, if you're early on in a process or early on in your company and you're introducing a new work stream, you say like, hey, if we invest in this automation, we take a little more time to like put in these security checks, like in the future, when our engineering team doubles or triples in size, like everyone will already be used to using these things, and we'll have like a more mature work stream at that point, and we can ship secure code faster. Like if you can kind of present a little bit the doom and gloom scenario of like, hey, we got this new work stream. If we put this thing in early, we're not going to have to go back, a year from now and add this to 20 different repos. Like we'll have already had the practice of doing this, early on. And so it's always like, it's always hard to get people to sometimes, not all the time, but to invest a little upfront. But you can also say like, hey, if we build this in now, like as a small thing, as it grows, like that kind of compliance is just going to automatically grow with it, because that's what people are used to.
Sounds like you want to have a relationship with your CFO as well in cybersecurity if you're going to need some investment up front.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, with that, that's going to conclude our call for today. And thank you to everyone for attending, and to our panelists for sharing your experience, insight, being transparent. Please watch for your inbox for the email with the recording of this event and a brief survey on your experience. And we hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to follow up with any one of us directly, or you can get to any of the companies from the email that will have the recording. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.